The conference room smelled like expensive cologne and desperation. Delaney Frost stood beneath the crystal chandelier of the Pinnacle Club's VIP suite, her fingers trembling against the legal pad she clutched like a lifeline. 20 pairs of eyes locked onto her. Investors in tailored suits, lawyers with calculating stares, and at the center of it all, Garrett Sterling, the man who'd promised her $5 million and then made her grovel for scraps. Her voice cut through the thick silence. To the firstborn son of the Union, the empire is promised. But beneath the cornerstone of Blackwood Manor lies the second ledger, proving the fortune was not earned, but stolen from the widow of the betrayed brother. A lawyer's pen clattered to the mahogany table. Garrett's knuckles went white around his scotch glass. The amber liquid sloshed, a drop hitting the antique wood like a gunshot in the stillness. Victoria Whitmore shot to her feet, chair scraping backward with a shriek that made half the room wince. "This is slander!" Her husband Clarence remained seated, but his face had drained to the color of old parchment. Sweat beaded at his temples despite the frigid air conditioning. The lead attorney found his voice first, though it came out strangled. "Mr. Sterling, if this translation is accurate, the entire Whitmore acquisition rests on stolen assets. $850 million invested in fraudulent property claims." Garrett's interruption was surgical, each word a blade. His gaze never left Delaney. Something moved behind those steel-gray eyes, an emotion she couldn't name. Recognition, perhaps, or the first tremor of understanding that this woman in a waitress uniform had just saved him from the costliest mistake of his career. Delaney's heart hammered against her ribs. The pendant hidden beneath her collar burned against her skin, suddenly too heavy, too hot. "Freeze!" Her own voice echoed in her skull, distant and dreamlike. "You want to know how a PhD linguist ended up translating a 200-year-old confession in front of billionaires? It started with a $5 million lie. But to understand how we got here, you need to see where it began." Darkness swallowed the scene. White text materialized against the void. 96 hours earlier. Morning light filtered through the smudged windows of Cipher Solutions, LLC, casting prison bar shadows across the cramped office. 8 desks crammed into a space meant for 4. File boxes stacked in corners like a cardboard skyline. The coffee maker sputtered its death rattle, same as it had for the past 6 months, held together by duct tape and prayers. Delaney stood at the head of the conference table, a folding card table someone had donated 3 years ago, and watched her team avoid eye contact. 14 days. She laid the foreclosure notice on the table. The red stamping seemed to pulse under the fluorescent lights. Her deputy, a 26-year-old computational linguist named Preston, cleared his throat. "Boss, if we win the lawsuit against CompuLingua, the lawsuit will take 6 months minimum." Delaney's words fell like stones into still water. "We have 14 days. Silence wrapped around them, suffocating. A phone vibrated against the table. Delaney glanced at the screen. Sycamore Hills Assisted Living Facility. Her stomach dropped through the floor. "Excuse me." She stepped into what passed for a hallway, really just a narrow gap between the bathroom and supply closet, and answered. "Ms. Frost, this is Nurse Patterson. Your father had another episode last night." Delaney pressed her forehead against the cool wall, eyes squeezed shut. "How bad?" "He wandered into the hallway at 3 in the morning, disoriented, asking for someone named Isabel. We got him back to his room, but Dr. Rosen wants to discuss moving him to 24-hour specialized care." The words came from far away, muffled by the roar of blood in Delaney's ears. "And the cost? Additional $4,000 per month. Also, the EKG from last week showed irregularities. Dr. Rosen recommends seeing a cardiologist as soon as possible." "How soon?" "This week, ideally." Delaney opened her eyes, stared at the water-stained ceiling tile directly above her head. Someone had drawn a smiley face on it years ago. The marker faded to ghost gray. I'll figure it out. She ended the call before the nurse could mention the 3 months of unpaid bills, before she could ask about the surgery consultation fee, before the kindness in her voice could crack Delaney's carefully maintained composure. Back at her desk, Delaney pulled up her bank statement. The numbers glowed accusingly. $3,247.18. Rent was due in 4 days. Payroll for her team in 7. The electric company had already sent 2 warnings. An email notification popped up. Final notice. Cipher Solutions LLC. Foreclosure proceedings. 14 days remaining. Her phone buzzed again. A text from Preston. Got rejected from 3 client pitches this week. CompuLingua told them we're under investigation. The lawsuits. Always the lawsuits. 2 years ago, her former dissertation advisor, the man who'd mentored her through Stanford, who called her the most brilliant student he'd seen in 30 years, had stolen her proprietary translation algorithm, packaged it, sold it to CompuLingua for 7 figures, then sued her for unauthorized use of collaborative research. The courts moved like glaciers. Her bank account bled like a severed artery. Delaney touched the silver pendant beneath her blouse. The metal was warm from her skin, the engraving worn smooth by decades of worried fingers. Her mother's fingers first, then hers. I.F. Isabel Frost. The woman who died when Delaney was 15. The woman who'd left more questions than answers, more mystery than memory. The woman who, according to Nathaniel Frost, the only father Delaney had ever known, had possessed a brilliant mind and a broken heart. A colleague had emailed her 2 months ago with a subject line, your inquiry about Isabel Frost, née Thorne. She still hadn't opened it. Some truths felt too heavy to carry alongside everything else. Delaney stood, grabbed her coat from the hook. I have to go. Cover for me if anyone calls. Preston looked up from his laptop. Where? Second job. His face fell. Everyone knew what that meant. The Pinnacle Club occupied the top 3 floors of the Whitmore Building in downtown Chicago, a monument to wealth so obscene it felt like satire. Art Deco fixtures dripped from ceilings. Persian rugs absorbed footsteps. Every surface gleamed with the kind of clean that required a small army of invisible hands. Delaney changed in the staff locker room, transforming from CEO to servant in the span of 5 minutes. White blouse starched to military precision. Black skirt that hit exactly 2 inches below the knee. Red apron tied with a bow that never quite sat straight. Name tag pinned above her heart. D. Frost. No doctor, no PhD, just another faceless worker in the machine. Holden Vance materialized in the doorway like a bad smell made flesh. 44 years old. Receding hairline camouflaged by aggressive product, a perpetual sneer that suggested he'd spent his entire life 1 rung below where he believed he deserved to be. Frost, Section C tonight. He looked her up and down with the subtlety of a meat inspector at market. And wipe that PhD smugness off your face. Customers don't pay to see your thoughts. They pay to see obedience. Delaney met his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to let him know she heard him, short enough to deny him the satisfaction of a challenge. Yes, sir. The words tasted like copper. Section C meant the overflow area. The tables near the kitchen door where the less important clients sat. Lower tips, ruder customers, the punishment assignments Holden doled out to anyone who dared show a spine. She'd been in Section C for 6 months straight. The evening shift began like all the others, a blur of forced smiles and swallowed pride. A businessman who snapped his fingers at her like summoning a dog. A couple who left 15% and called it generous. A woman who sent back her wine 3 times, not because it was wrong, but because she could. Holden watched from his perch near the bar, a predator enjoying the hunt. Around 9:30, he intercepted Delaney as she carried a tray of dirty glasses. Table 4's tips? I'm redistributing them. Those are mine. We're yours. Stephanie's been working hard tonight. Stephanie, who'd been flirting with Holden in the storage room an hour ago. Stephanie, who'd served half as many tables with twice as much attitude. Delaney's fingers tightened on the tray until her knuckles went bloodless. That's theft. Holden stepped closer, his breath coffee-stale and menacing. That's management. You have a problem with how I run my club? There's the door. Though I wonder how long it'll take you to find another job after I make a few calls. The threat hung between them like smoke. Delaney stepped back, lowered her gaze. No problem, sir. Good girl. The condescension dripped like poison. Table 7 sat in the corner, half hidden by a marble column and an enormous fiddle-leaf fig that probably cost more than Delaney's monthly rent. The man occupying it projected the kind of stillness that comes from absolute certainty. Certainty of power, certainty of worth, certainty that the world bends around men like him because it always has. Garrett Sterling. Even people who didn't follow business news knew the name. Sterling Telecommunications had made him one of the 50 wealthiest people in America before he turned 50. Now at 62, he'd evolved from merely rich to institutionally powerful, the kind of man who shaped markets with a single interview. Delaney approached with the careful neutrality she'd perfected over 2 years of serving Chicago's elite. Good evening, sir. Tonight's special is a pan-seared Glenlivet 18, neat, no conversation. His voice carried the texture of gravel wrapped in silk. He didn't look up from the financial report spread across the table, illuminated by the soft glow of a tablet he scrolled through with practiced efficiency. Understood. Delaney poured the scotch with mechanical precision, the amber liquid catching light as it filled the crystal tumbler. She set it down without a sound, turned to leave. Wait. She froze. Garrett's gaze had lifted from his papers, but he wasn't looking at her face. His attention fixed somewhere near her collar, his expression shifting through micro-emotions too quick to catalog. Shock, recognition, something that might have been grief if billionaires allowed themselves such pedestrian feelings. That pendant. Delaney's hand flew to her throat, fingers closing protectively around the silver charms she'd worn every day since her mother's funeral. Sir, where did you get it? The question landed like an accusation. His eyes, steel gray, the color of frozen lakes, finally met hers, and the intensity there made her want to step back. She held her ground through sheer stubbornness. It was my mother's. And before that? I don't know, she never said. A muscle in Garrett's jaw tightened. He stared at her for 3 more seconds that stretched like hours, then looked away with visible effort. Nothing. My mistake. But his hand trembled slightly as he lifted the scotch to his lips. Delaney retreated, heart pounding for reasons she couldn't articulate. In the reflection of the polished brass wall sconce, she watched him watch her walk away, watched him set down his drink untouched, watched him pull out his phone and type something with the urgency of a man who'd just seen a ghost. At 10:45, the VIP room doors open. Holden's entire demeanor transformed, spine straightening, obsequious smile materializing like a magic trick. He practically bowed as Garrett Sterling led a procession of suits and predatory gazes into the private dining space. 20 people, maybe 25. The kind of crowd that meant 5 figures in food and wine alone. This was the real Pinnacle Club. The place where deals got made and futures got decided over $18 per ounce Wagyu. Delaney returned to Section C, to the businessman who decided 16% was sufficient for 45 minutes of impeccable service. She cleared tables, refilled water glasses, became invisible the way poverty teaches you to become invisible in rooms where wealth breathes the air you're rationed. Around 11, voices rose behind the VIP room's double doors. Not quite shouting, but elevated, tense. Holden appeared at her elbow like a materialized nightmare. Frost, refill the water pitchers for VIP and keep your mouth shut. She collected the crystal pitchers from the service station, noting their weight, their coldness against her palms. pushed through the double doors into a world that seemed to exist in a different dimension from the rest of the club. The table could have seated 30. Garrett sat at the head, flanked by lawyers who radiated expensive education and suppressed panic. To his right, a man in his late 50s with the kind of tan that came from private beaches and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. Clarence Whitmore, the name clicked into place from business profiles Delaney had scrolled past during insomnia-fueled 3 a.m. internet spirals. COO of Sterling Telecommunications, Garrett's right hand for 3 decades. Also, if the profiles were accurate, the man whose family company Garrett was trying to acquire for nearly $1 billion. On the projection screen at the room's far end, an image glowed. A photograph of old parchment, yellowed and brittle-looking even in digital reproduction. Text covered it in dense, angry script that seemed to writhe across the page. A lawyer, young, sweating through his collar, gestured at the document with barely controlled frustration. Mr. Sterling, we've consulted 3 universities, Yale's linguistics department, the Newberry Library, even the Vatican's archival specialists. No one can decode the heritage clause. Garrett's fingers drummed against the table, each tap a small detonation of impatience. So we're stalled on an $850 million acquisition because our ancestors were paranoid enough to encrypt a property transfer. It's legally binding. The lawyer's voice cracked slightly. The Whitmore family charter requires full translation and compliance with any conditions specified in the clause before ownership transfers. We can't proceed without it. Clarence Whitmore leaned back, projecting the ease of someone without a care in the world. Garrett, my friend, it's pure formality. My family's held these assets for 200 years. There are no hidden conditions, just 19th century eccentricity. Then why can't anyone read it? Banking families in the 1800s loved their codes. Paranoia about Napoleon, about revolutionary movements. They encoded everything. Garrett grabbed the photograph from the table, held it up to the light, as if proximity might reveal secrets that expertise had failed to extract. It's ink on paper. It's not magic. Delaney had been refilling water glasses at the far end of the table, making herself small and ignorable. But from her angle, she could see the projection screen clearly, could see the script that the lawyers called indecipherable. Recognition hit her like a physical blow. Fugger Whitmore banking cipher. She'd written 60 pages on it in her dissertation, spent 8 months in Stanford's rare books library, cross-referencing 18th century German banking records with encrypted ledgers from the Tyrolean merchant families. The script mixed Aramaic characters with German phonetic encoding, layered over a mathematical cipher based on Catholic feast day dates. It was her specialty, her obsession, the academic work that had gotten her labeled brilliant before the world had labeled her broke. Her hand stilled on the water pitcher. Walk away. Keep your head down. Serve the drinks and collect your $42 in tips and go home to your dying father and your dying company and keep surviving in the small, gray space you've carved out of other people's abundance. Or, Garrett's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. I'm tired of academics in ivory towers telling me what's impossible. He yanked out his checkbook. Actual paper, the kind only the truly wealthy bothered with anymore, and scrawled something with violent strokes. Ripped the check free with a sound like tearing silk. $5 million. He slapped it down on top of the document photograph. To anyone in this room who can translate this, right now, I don't care if you're a lawyer, a consultant, or a janitor, $5 million to solve my problem. The room went silent. Clarence's smile faltered for just a heartbeat. The lawyers stared at the check like it might bite them. Garrett's gaze swept across the assembled crowd, and Delaney saw it for what it was. Theater. Cruelty dressed up as opportunity. He knew no one in this room could translate the document. He was making a point about the futility of obstacles, the ultimate power of capital to bend reality. His eyes landed on her. What about you? Every head turned. Delaney stood frozen, water pitcher still in hand, feeling like a deer caught in headlights. Think you can read 18th century German banking cipher? A few investors chuckled. Clarence's smile returned, wider this time. The logical choice presented itself with brutal clarity. Apologize for the interruption, retreat to safety, protect the fragile equilibrium of her existence. But $5 million. $5 million could save Cypher Solutions, could pay for her father's surgery, his specialized care, the years he might have left if modern medicine got the chance to work its miracles. Could mean sleeping more than 4 hours a night. Could mean choosing between dignity and survival wasn't a daily crucifixion. Delaney set down the pitcher. I can translate it. The laughter died. Garrett's expression shifted from amusement to something sharper. Interested. The predator scenting unexpected prey. Your name? Dr. Delaney Frost, Ph.D. in Ancient Linguistics, Stanford University. Specialization in medieval cryptography and banking ciphers. Saying it out loud after 2 years of swallowing her credentials felt like breaking a dam, like reclaiming a self she'd packed away in boxes along with her degrees and her hope. Clarence Whitmore stood abruptly. Garrett, this is absurd. She's a waitress. She's a doctor. Garrett's correction was soft but absolute. His gaze never left Delaney's face. Though I'm curious about that fall from grace. Stanford to serving cocktails seems like quite a trajectory. Heat crawled up Delaney's neck. Shame and rage tangled into something that tasted like battery acid. I'm here to translate, not to provide my resume. Fair. Garrett gestured to the empty chair beside him. But understand this. If you waste my time with fabricated nonsense, I'll have you fired and blacklisted from every establishment in Chicago. Not hyperbole, fact. Delaney's throat went dry. And if I'm right, Garrett tapped the check, then you're $5 million richer. She walked to the chair on legs that felt disconnected from her body, sat down in leather that probably cost more than her car. The grease stain on her apron seemed to glow under the chandelier light. She smelled like kitchen steam and desperation, surrounded by cologne that came in bottles shaped like art. A lawyer slid a fountain pen and legal pad across the table. The pen weighed more than it should, balanced with the precision of something designed to sign billion-dollar contracts. Delaney picked it up. The projection screen showed the document in high resolution now. The script that had defeated Yale and the Vatican arranged itself into patterns only she could see. The recognition came not from memory but from muscle, from months of tracing these exact letter forms in archives, from nights of scribbling cipher keys until her hand cramped. Base layer, Aramaic characters representing German phonemes. Secondary encoding, Caesar shift +4. Tertiary complexity, date-based numerical substitution using the Catholic liturgical calendar. Her mind lit up like a city grid after a blackout. She began to write. 7 minutes passed in complete silence. The only sounds were the scratch of expensive nib on expensive paper and the barely audible hum of climate control working to keep wealthy bodies comfortable. Delaney worked with the focused intensity of someone diffusing a bomb, because in a way, she was. Every stroke of the pen either built towards salvation or detonation. Garrett watched her with the stillness of a man accustomed to studying people for weaknesses. The other investors shifted in their seats, glanced at watches, communicated skepticism through raised eyebrows and barely concealed smirks. Clarence Whitmore's jaw clenched tighter with each passing minute. Finally, Delaney set down the pen, capped it with a decisive click. It's not an asset transfer. She slid the legal pad toward Garrett. It's a confession. He pulled the pad close, began to read. With each line, the blood drained from his face until he looked carved from marble. When he finished, he set the paper down with the gentleness of someone handling live explosives. Then he read it aloud, and his voice carried the weight of buildings collapsing. To the firstborn son of the Union, the empire is promised. But let it be known that the second ledger, the one buried beneath the cornerstone of Blackwood Manor, Virginia, holds the truth of the theft. The fortune was not earned, but taken from the widow of the brother betrayed, the silent partner who provided false witnesses to the courts, the House of Whitmore, in exchange for 30% ownership of the shipping contracts. Signed, Heinrich Steinberg, December 1809. A lawyer's pen hit the floor. Another lawyer began typing frantically on his laptop. The lead counsel found his voice, though it emerged strangled and thin. Mr. Sterling, this means the Whitmore family's claim to the company is based on stolen assets. Garrett finished the thought with surgical precision. Which means if I sign the acquisition tomorrow, I'll have invested $850 million in fraudulent property. The Steinberg descendants could sue and invalidate the entire transaction. He looked at Delaney, and something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't name. Respect, maybe, or the first tremor of recognition that this woman in a stained apron had just saved him from catastrophe. You just prevented the biggest mistake of my career. He reached for the check. Delaney's heart hammered so hard she felt it in her throat. $5 million. The words that could change everything. The salvation she'd prayed for without believing in prayer. Garrett picked up the check, then he folded it, slowly, deliberately, put it back in his pocket. Impressive work, Dr. Frost. Truly remarkable. The room tilted. Sir, you promised. $5 million for 7 minutes of effort? Garrett's smile held no warmth. That was clearly hyperbolic, a rhetorical device to illustrate a point about the value of expertise. The words hit like a fist to the solar plexus. You made a bet. Everyone in this room heard you. And you proved my point beautifully. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a stack of bills, counted them with the casual precision of someone for whom money was air. 20 $100 bills. $2,000, the largest tip you'll ever receive. He set the cash on the table between them. Consider yourself fortunate. Clarence Whitmore's laugh cut through the silence, sharp and triumphant. Don't be greedy, sweetheart. Take the money. Buy yourself something nice, maybe a less tragic wardrobe. Delaney stared at the bills, at the check that had disappeared back into Garrett Sterling's pocket, at the smirking faces of men who just watched her humiliation and found it entertaining. Something inside her broke. Not her spirit, that would have been a mercy. What broke was the carefully maintained fiction that dignity and survival could coexist in a world built by people like this. For people like this. She stood, left the $2,000 on the table, looked Garrett Sterling in the eye with a steadiness that surprised even her. Keep it. You clearly need it more than I do. His eyebrow arched. Integrity is expensive, Mr. Sterling, and you, sir, appear to be bankrupt in that particular currency. She turned to walk away, but something made her pause. Some petty instinct for revenge that overrode self-preservation. Oh, Mr. Whitmore? Clarence's expression froze mid-smirk. There's a postscript to that translation I didn't read aloud. What? The document also mentions that the silent partner's descendants have been siphoning funds from the estate for 7 generations. It recommends a comprehensive audit to trace the money. Exact quote, "Let no stone remain unturned, for corruption roots deep." She looked back at Garrett. You might want to start with your business partners. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones with the most to hide. Then she walked, through the double doors, past Holden Vance, whose face had gone purple with fury, through the kitchen where she grabbed her coat from the hook, out the back door into the December cold of Chicago at midnight. The door slammed behind her, cutting off the eruption of voices. Snow had begun to fall, thin, sharp flakes that stung exposed skin. Delaney stood in the alley behind the Pinnacle Club, breathing in air that tasted like metal and exhaust and freedom. Her phone buzzed. A text from Holden. Don't come back. You're fired. We'll make sure you never work in this city again. She deleted it without responding. Another buzz. Email notification. Urgent. Your father needs you. Call immediately. Sycamore Hills. The adrenaline drained out of her system, leaving behind cold reality. No job, no $5 million, no miraculous salvation. Just debt and desperation and the crushing weight of having done the right thing in a world that punished righteousness like a crime. She called an Uber, watched the estimated arrival time tick up as surge pricing kicked in, canceled it when the fare hit $48 for a 12-mile ride. She'd walk to the red line, take the train to the facility, figure out the rest later, because later was all she had left. The studio apartment in Pilsen smelled like mildew, and the ghost of takeout consumed 3 days ago. Delaney sat on the floor with her back against the wall, knees pulled to her chest. No tears. She'd learned years ago that crying accomplished nothing except making her face puffy and her throat raw. The clock on the microwave read 2:47 a.m. in angry red numerals. Her phone sat beside her, screen dark except for the notification light, blinking its relentless rhythm. She'd ignored it for 20 minutes, but avoidance had limits. She picked it up, opened the messages. Sycamore Hills, 11:52 p.m. Ms. Frost, your father had a cardiac episode this evening. He's stable now, but Dr. Rosen wants to see you first thing tomorrow. The EKG results are concerning. Cipher Solutions, Wells Fargo, 1:14 a.m. Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings will commence in 10 days unless balance of $127,840 is paid in full. Preston, 1:33 a.m. Boss, I know it's late. CompuLingua filed for injunction to freeze all our assets. We can't pay rent on the office. I'm so sorry. The phone felt like it weighed 50 pounds. Delaney set it down, very carefully, and stared at the water stain on the ceiling. Someone before her had drawn a smiley face on it. The marker had faded to ghost gray, but the optimism it represented felt like archaeology from a vanished civilization. A knock on the door. For a wild moment, she imagined it might be Garrett Sterling, come to apologize, to hand her the check and confess he'd been testing her character. But fairy tales were for children and the willfully deluded. She didn't get up, didn't acknowledge the sound. The knock came again, harder. Miss Frost, I can hear you breathing. I need 5 minutes of your time. The voice was male, unfamiliar, carrying the neutral authority of law enforcement or process servers. Delaney debated ignoring it. Let them tape the eviction notice to the door. Let the world continue its patient dismantling of her life while she sat here in the dark. But you couldn't hide from everything forever. She stood, opened the door. The man on the other side looked like he'd stepped out of a film noir, late 50s, gray suit tailored within an inch of propriety, eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. He held a leather briefcase and an expression of professional neutrality. Dr. Frost, I'm Barrett Hayes, private investigator. I work for Garrett Sterling. Every muscle in Delaney's body went rigid. If you're here to threaten me, I'm here to deliver a message. He pulled a sealed envelope from his briefcase. Heavy stock paper, the kind that cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. Mr. Sterling would like to speak with you tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. His office at Sterling Telecommunications. I don't want to speak to him. The message includes a signing bonus. He handed her the envelope. Delaney opened it with fingers that had gone numb. Inside, a cashier's check made out to Sycamore Hills Assisted Living Facility. The amount, $85,000. A note card in heavy script. For your father's surgery, no strings. Consider it an apology for my conduct this evening. We still need to talk. G.S. The hallway spun. I don't understand. Barrett Hayes allowed himself the smallest smile. Mr. Sterling has a habit of making impulsive decisions when angry. He also has a habit of correcting those decisions when he's had time to think. He's requesting a meeting, not as employer to employee, as one professional to another. What does he want? That's between you and him, but I can tell you this much. After you left tonight, he spent 3 hours reading your dissertation, all 60 pages. He called it brilliant. Then he called me and told me to find you. Delaney looked at the check, at the number that could save her father's life. This is guilt money. This is recognition. Barrett's expression softened slightly. You don't have to take the meeting, but I'd suggest hearing what he has to say before you decide he's irredeemable. He handed her a business card. Garrett Sterling's private office line, embossed in silver. 10 a.m. If you're not there, the check is still yours. No obligations. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, I've worked for Mr. Sterling for 15 years. He's an arrogant bastard who mistakes wealth for wisdom more often than he should. But he's not cruel, and he's not a liar despite what happened tonight. He just needed you to call him on his bullshit. Most people are too scared of him to try. Barrett Hayes walked down the hallway and disappeared into the stairwell. Delaney stood in her doorway, holding $85,000 in a business card, wondering if this was salvation or just a more elaborate trap. Across the city, in a penthouse that occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building with his name on it, Garrett Sterling couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, surrounded by screens that tracked global markets in real time. Tokyo had opened 2 hours ago. London would wake soon. But the numbers that usually absorbed his attention slid past without registering. On his desk, a photograph. The woman in it was young, maybe 27, 28. She stood in front of the University of Chicago Library, autumn leaves scattered at her feet, holding a stack of books that threatened to topple. Her hair caught the light like spun copper, and around her neck, a silver pendant with the initials IF, engraved in script so delicate it almost disappeared. Isabel Frost. 28 years ago, she'd walked into his life during a fundraising gala for the university's linguistics department. She'd corrected his pronunciation of Schmetterling with a smile that felt like coming home. They'd talked until the staff started stacking chairs. He'd been married, a strategic alliance arranged by families, the kind of bloodless partnership that made sense on paper and felt like death in practice. She'd been brilliant, alive. Everything his carefully constructed life wasn't. They'd had 6 months, then she'd vanished. He'd searched for years, hired investigators, followed dead-end leads across 3 continents, found nothing, as if she'd dissolved into air. Until tonight, when a waitress walked up to his table wearing a pendant that couldn't possibly exist anywhere except in this photograph, and on the neck of the woman who disappeared with his heart. Garrett pulled up the file Barrett had sent an hour ago. Subject, Delaney Frost. Age, 28. Born, April 12, 1996, Chicago, Illinois. Mother, Isabel Frost, née Thorne, deceased 2011. Father, listed, Nathaniel Frost, age 68, currently residing at Sycamore Hills Assisted Living. Education, Stanford University, PhD in Ancient Linguistics. Graduated 2020. The timeline worked. Isabel had disappeared in September 1995. Delaney was born in April 1996. 7 months. Garrett picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. Barrett answered on the first ring. It's 3 in the morning, boss. I need a DNA comparison, discreetly. Silence on the other end of the line. You think she's yours. I think Isabel disappeared pregnant and married someone else to protect the child. I think that pendant isn't a coincidence. DNA requires her consent or a sample obtained without her knowledge, which gets legally complicated. You obtained a coffee cup from Cipher Solutions this afternoon. I saw it on your expense report. Barrett sighed. The lab will have results in 48 hours. But boss, maybe ask her first. The direct approach occasionally works better than espionage. And if I'm wrong, if I scare her off with paternity accusations before I have proof, then you'll have your answer either way. Garrett ended the call. He looked at Isabel's photograph for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and began drafting an email to his legal team with the subject line, Immediate audit required. Whitmore Holdings. All accounts. 30 years. Delaney Frost had given him more than a translation tonight. She'd given him a map to the rot at the center of his empire. And possibly, though he barely let himself consider it, a daughter he'd never known existed. Outside his window, Chicago glittered like a jewelry box spilled across velvet. The city where he'd built everything, where he'd lost everything, where maybe, just maybe, he might find the one thing that mattered more than all the rest combined. Morning arrived without mercy. Delaney stood outside Cypher Solutions at 7:50, keys in hand, staring at the darkened windows of the office she'd poured 5 years into building. The cashier's check sat in her jacket pocket like a live coal, radiating possibility and dread in equal measure. The door unlocked with its familiar click. Inside, the space felt smaller than it had yesterday, as if the walls had crept inward overnight. Preston arrived at 8:03, laptop bag slung over one shoulder, dark circles under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. "Boss," he stopped when he saw her expression. "CompuLingua filed an injunction. Federal court. They're freezing all our assets pending the lawsuit resolution. We can't take new clients, can't bid on contracts. The judge granted it because we represent a flight risk for intellectual property theft." Delaney sank into the nearest chair. "When?" "Paperwork came through at midnight. Our lawyer says it could take 6 months to appeal." The other team members filtered in over the next 20 minutes. Nobody spoke. They'd all seen the writing on the wall, rendered in legalese in financial statements. Delaney pulled the check from her pocket, set it on the conference table where everyone could see. $85,000. Enough to keep us operational for 2 months if we cut salaries to bare minimum. Preston leaned closer, reading the memo line. "Nathaniel Frost Medical Care." "Boss, that's for your father." "My father needs surgery, not company operations. But if I use it for him, you're all unemployed by next week. If I use it to keep the lights on, maybe we buy enough time to fight the injunction." The words tasted like ashes. Her deputy studied her with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for diffusing explosives. "What do you want to do?" Before she could answer, her phone vibrated. Barrett Hayes, the number from the business card. She stepped into the hallway. "Dr. Frost, Mr. Sterling is expecting you at 10. The meeting is still on." "I haven't decided if I'm coming." He's prepared to make a formal offer, one that might solve more problems than the check in your pocket. Delaney closed her eyes. "I'll be there." Sterling Telecommunications occupied floors 30 through 45 of a glass tower that caught the morning sun and threw it back at the city like a challenge. Delaney rode the elevator to the executive level, hyper-conscious of her reflection in the polished steel doors. The same navy suit she'd worn to her dissertation defense 6 years ago. Shoes she'd resold twice. Makeup applied with shaking hands in a coffee shop bathroom. The receptionist, a woman who'd probably never worried about rent in her life, ushered her through corridors lined with awards and magazine covers featuring Garrett Sterling looking visionary and untouchable. His office took up the entire southwest corner. Windows on 2 sides framed Chicago like something he'd purchased and mounted for display. The furniture cost more than Delaney's student loans. Original artwork she recognized from auction catalogs she'd browsed during better days hung on walls the color of bone. Garrett stood at the window, watching the city. He turned when she entered. "Dr. Frost, thank you for coming." The formality felt like walking on ice too thin to trust. "Your investigator said you had an offer." "I do, but first, an apology." He gestured to the sitting area, leather couches arranged around a coffee table that probably weighed more than her car. She sat. He remained standing, which gave him the tactical advantage of height. A negotiating trick she recognized from business school courses she'd audited between library shifts. "Last night, I behaved like the worst kind of arrogant fool. I made a promise in bad faith, then attempted to buy my way out of the consequences. You called me bankrupt in integrity. You were correct." The admission hung between them. I checked on your father this morning. The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow. I've also contacted the facility's billing department and cleared all outstanding balances. Delaney's throat tightened. You didn't need to do that. I did, because what I'm about to ask requires trust, and I destroyed any foundation for that trust the moment I pocketed that check. He moved to his desk, returned with a folder thick enough to require a binder clip. After you left the Pinnacle Club, I spent 3 hours reading your dissertation. Then I had my team compile every academic paper you've published. 27 in total. Your work on Fugger-Whitmore banking ciphers is the most comprehensive analysis in existence. Yale's linguistics department cited you 16 times in their most recent journal. Heat crept into Delaney's cheeks. I'm aware of my credentials. Then you're also aware that you're wasting them serving cocktails to people who wouldn't recognize brilliance if it translated their salvation in real time. The words landed with surgical precision. Garrett sat across from her, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his hair, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of decades reading contracts and balance sheets. I need you, Dr. Frost, not as an employee, as a partner. He opened the folder. Inside, maps of Virginia marked with red circles, architectural surveys, property records dating back to the 18th century. Blackwood Manor, the location mentioned in your translation. It exists. Abandoned since the 1960s, but the estate remains structurally sound. According to historical records, the Steinberg family maintained extensive archives there until the last heir died without issue in 1958. Delaney leaned forward despite herself. You want to find the second ledger? I want proof that Clarence Whitmore's family built their fortune on theft. More importantly, I want to know what else they've been hiding. Your translation mentions 7 generations of financial siphoning. That means ongoing fraud, not just historical curiosity. And you need someone who can read documents written in cipher. I need someone I can trust. My lawyers are compromised. Half my executive team plays golf with Clarence. The only person involved in this entire mess who isn't on anyone's payroll is you. He pulled a contract from the folder. 3 pages, dense with legalese, but mercifully brief. $100,000, wired today. Another $900,000 when we locate and translate the Blackwood Manor archives. All expenses paid. Medical care for your father at the best cardiac facility in Illinois. And he paused, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away. If we find evidence of ongoing fraud, I'll need expert testimony in court. Your company will be retained as the official linguistic consultant for Sterling Telecommunications at $200,000 per year. 3-year contract, enough to save Cipher Solutions and fight your lawsuit. The numbers didn't feel real. They existed in some alternate dimension where people like her got second chances. Why? Because you were right about me. I am bankrupt in the ways that matter. I've spent 30 years building an empire on assumptions and delegated trust. You showed me in 7 minutes what years of due diligence missed. That's worth infinitely more than money. He extended a pen. I'm not asking you to like me, Dr. Frost. I'm asking you to help me burn down the corruption I was too blind to see. After that, we never have to speak again if you prefer. Delaney took the pen, read the contract twice, found no hidden clauses, no trap doors. I have one condition. Name it. If you ever lie to me again, the contract is void and you owe me the full $1 million immediately. No arbitration, no legal wrangling, just payment. Garrett's mouth curved into something that might have been respect. Agreed. I'll have it added as an amendment. She signed. 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Delaney's father came through surgery with better results than anyone had dared hope. The cardiac team at Northwestern Memorial, doctors whose fees alone could buy houses, reported improved blood flow and stable rhythms. He'd need months of rehabilitation, but the immediate crisis had passed. Cypher's Solutions received its retainer payment. Preston nearly wept when he saw the bank transfer, and Delaney found herself in the passenger seat of a black SUV heading south on I-57, leaving Chicago behind as buildings gave way to suburbs, gave way to farmland, stretching toward the horizon. Barrett Hayes drove with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent years behind wheels in worse situations. Two security contractors, former military based on the way they carried themselves, occupied the vehicle behind them. Garrett sat in the third row, reading reports on a tablet, occasionally glancing up to watch the landscape change. 5 hours of highway hypnosis, rest stops with bad coffee, farmland yielding to forest as they crossed into Virginia. Garrett broke the silence somewhere past the West Virginia border. "Tell me about your mother." Delaney had been watching pine trees scroll past, half asleep despite the coffee. "Why?" "Because you're wearing her pendant. Because I knew someone once who owned an identical piece. Because I'm curious if the coincidence extends beyond jewelry." The air in the vehicle shifted, molecules rearranging into patterns of held breath and careful attention. "Her name was Isabel Thorne. She changed it to Frost when she married my father, Nathaniel. She worked as a linguistic researcher at the University of Chicago until I was born. Died in a car accident when I was 15. What did she research? Medieval banking codes, German merchant families, the same material I ended up studying, though I didn't realize I was following her path until halfway through my doctorate." Garrett's reflection in the window went very still. Did she ever mention knowing a businessman? Someone she worked with in the mid-90s? Delaney turned to face him directly. "What are you really asking?" "I'm asking if Isabel ever spoke about someone named Garrett." The confession landed like a stone into still water. "No, she barely talked about her life before Nathaniel. I always assumed she was protecting something painful." "Why?" Garrett set down his tablet. "Because 28 years ago, I had a relationship with a linguistic researcher named Isabel Thorne. She wore a pendant identical to yours. We were together for 6 months before she disappeared without explanation. I searched for her for 15 years. The SUV's engine hummed. Trees blurred past. The moment stretched like taffy. "You think I don't think anything yet, but the timeline is suggestive, and that pendant is too specific to be mass-produced." Delaney's hand went to her throat, fingers closing around the silver charm she'd worn every day since her mother placed it around her neck, with shaking hands and words that had sounded like, "Goodbye." "If you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, you should know that I already have a father. Nathaniel Frost raised me, loved me. That's not something biology overrides. I'm not trying to override anything. I'm trying to understand why Isabel vanished, why she changed her name, why she never contacted me again, even though I spent a fortune trying to find her." Something in his voice, vulnerability wrapped in certainty wrapped in loss, made Delaney reconsider her defensive posture. "She never mentioned you, but a few weeks before she died, she told me that the pendant came from someone important, someone who'd given her hope when she needed it most. She said if I ever felt lost, I should remember that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what you love to protect it." Garrett closed his eyes. "That sounds like her." They drove the rest of the way in silence, heavy with questions neither of them knew how to ask. Blackwood Manor rose from the Virginia forest like something conjured from Gothic fiction. 3 stories of weathered brick and boarded windows. Ivy had conquered the east wall. The iron gate hung crooked on hinges, orange with rust. Barrett cut the padlock with bolt cutters. The gate screamed open, protesting decades of disuse. Inside, the manor smelled of rot and time. Wallpaper peeled in long strips. Chandeliers hung skeletal and dusty. Furniture remained under white sheets like ghosts, waiting for resurrection. Archives are below ground level. Barrett consulted architectural plans on his phone. Original plans show a storage vault accessible through the kitchen. They found the entrance behind a false panel that required 3 men to shift. Stone steps descended into darkness that swallowed their flashlight beams. The archive room stretched 30 feet in each direction. Metal shelving units lined 3 walls, packed with ledgers and documents in various states of decay. The air tasted stale, untouched by fresh oxygen since Kennedy was president. Delaney approached the nearest shelf with the reverence of someone entering a cathedral. "This is going to take days." "We have days." Garrett set up battery-powered work lights. "What are we looking for?" "The Steinberg Ledger, 1809. Leather binding, probably pigskin based on the period. Look for anything with family crests or banking symbols." They worked in near silence, broken only by the rustle of ancient paper and occasional coughs when disturbed dust became too thick to breathe. Hours bled together. The security team took turns keeping watch upstairs, paranoid about structural collapse or unwanted visitors. Barrett found it 6 hours in. "Boss, southwest corner, bottom shelf." The ledger was massive, 18 inches tall, 12 wide, bound in leather that had darkened to near black with age. The cover bore a sigil Delaney recognized from her research: the Steinberg banking family crest, a stylized strongbox surrounded by wheat sheaves. She lifted it with hands that had started trembling. "This is it." The pages crackled when she opened them. The script was dense, angry, written by someone who'd pressed the quill hard enough to indent the parchment. Every line encoded, every word a puzzle. Garrett dragged over a work table, set up lights, provided her with paper and pens. In the silence, she needed to work. 8 hours collapsed into focus so intense that time became meaningless. Delaney translated page by page, building the story like archaeology. The theft, the conspiracy, the false witnesses provided by the Whitmore family in exchange for permanent revenue share. And on the final page, an entry that made her breath catch. "Should the truth be discovered, seek justice through the vault in the National Trust. Deposit box 1809W, key held by firstborn Steinberg heir." There lies proof beyond refutation. Garrett looked up from the coffee he'd been nursing for the past hour. The National Trust. That's what First Continental Bank was called in the 19th century. There's a safety deposit box in Washington, D.C. with physical evidence. Then we're going to D.C. They photographed every page of the ledger, packed it carefully in a protective case, locked up Blackwood Manor behind them, and drove north toward the Capitol as the sun set over the Appalachian foothills. Returning to Chicago felt like walking back into a trap. Delaney knew it the moment the plane touched down at O'Hare, some animal instinct screaming warnings her rational mind tried to dismiss. She arrived at her apartment at 11 p.m., exhausted down to her marrow. The key stuck in the lock, unusual, but not unprecedented in a building held together by code violations and wishful thinking. The door swung open. 3 police officers stood in her living room. "Delaney Frost?" Her heart stopped. "Yes?" "You're under arrest for possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute." The words didn't make sense. She watched from somewhere outside her body as they read her rights, as they showed her the evidence they'd found. A Ziploc bag containing what looked like 100 grams of white powder, hidden in her bedroom closet behind a box of winter sweaters. "That's not mine." The words sounded pathetic even to her own ears. "We received an anonymous tip, obtained a warrant. The evidence speaks for itself." They put her in handcuffs, led her down 3 flights of stairs while neighbors watched through cracked doors, loaded her into a squad car that smelled like fear and disinfectant. At the station, they processed her with the mechanical efficiency of people who'd done this 10,000 times. Fingerprints, mugshot, inventory of personal effects. She got one phone call. She dialed Garrett's cell. "Dr. Frost? I've been arrested. Drug charges. I was set up." Silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that she thought he'd hung up. "I'll handle it." "Garrett, someone planted—" "I know. I'm calling my lawyers now." The line went dead. They put her in a holding cell with 2 other women, One slept in the corner, curled around herself like a question mark. The other stared at the wall with eyes that had stopped seeing years ago. Delaney sat on the metal bench and tried to think through the panic. Someone had done this. Someone with access to her apartment. Someone who knew she'd left town and had time to plant evidence. Holden. The thought crystallized with awful certainty. Holden, who'd threatened to destroy her. Who had keys to employee apartments through some arrangement with the building's owner. Who was petty enough and cruel enough to. Her phone vibrated in the property bag at the front desk, 3 rooms away. She couldn't hear it, but she felt it the way you feel earthquakes start in your bones before your ears register the sound. Hours passed. The fluorescent lights never dimmed. Time became elastic, stretching and compressing until she couldn't tell if she'd been here for minutes or days. A guard appeared at the cell door around 5 a.m. "Frost, you made bail." She followed him to processing in a daze, signed papers, collected her belongings. Barrett Hayes waited in the lobby, looking as fresh as if he'd just stepped out of a boardroom, despite the obscene hour. "Mr. Sterling posted your bail, $500,000. I didn't do it." "I know, so does he. Come on." The SUV idled at the curb. Garrett sat in the back, phone pressed to his ear, having a conversation in the clipped tones of someone used to ending arguments through sheer force of will. He hung up when she climbed in. "Forensic analysis of the evidence would take 3 weeks. But I've already hired the best defense attorney in Illinois. She'll tear apart the chain of custody. Someone set me up. Clarence." Garrett's certainty was absolute. "He knows we're getting close. This is a warning shot. Discredit you before you can testify about the translation." The SUV pulled into traffic. Dawn was breaking over the city, painting everything in shades of orange and blood. Delaney's phone buzzed. She'd been ignoring notifications for hours, but this one came through with the piercing insistence of an emergency alert. "Sycamore Hills Assisted Living. Urgent. Your father has had a cardiac event. We need you here immediately." The world tilted. "Barrett, drive to Sycamore Hills. Now." They arrived to chaos. Ambulances in the parking lot. EMTs loading a gurney into the back of a rescue unit. Delaney ran. The gurney held her father, oxygen mask over his face, monitors beeping in rhythms that sounded too fast, too irregular. "What happened?" A nurse she didn't recognize, young, frightened, stumbled over her words. "2 men came in around 3 a.m., said they were from the hospital, needed to adjust his medication. We thought they had badges." "What did they do?" "They injected something into his IV. He went into cardiac arrest 20 minutes later. We performed CPR, got him back, but..." The ambulance doors slammed shut. Sirens wailed to life. "St. Joseph's Medical Center. You can follow." Delaney stood in the parking lot, watching the ambulance disappear into traffic. Garrett's hand landed on her shoulder. "We'll get there. Barrett, follow that ambulance." They reached the hospital in time to watch doctors disappear behind emergency room doors. A nurse directed them to a waiting area that smelled like antiseptic and desperation. 40 minutes later, a doctor emerged. Young, tired, the kind of exhausted that comes from fighting death and winning by inches. "Are you family?" "I'm his daughter." "We stabilized him, but there was significant damage to his heart. The substance they injected appears to be a massive dose of potassium. It's designed to cause cardiac arrest that looks natural. Your father is very lucky the staff responded as quickly as they did." "Will he recover?" The doctor's pause said everything. "We're doing everything we can." They let her see him. He looked small in the hospital bed, diminished by tubes and wires, and machines doing the work his body couldn't manage alone. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. Delaney took his hand. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." No response. Just the steady beep of monitors, marking time and heartbeats. A nurse touched her arm. "You should get some rest. We'll call if anything changes." Delaney looked up at the woman. 50s, kind eyes, probably a mother herself. "Someone tried to kill him. To get to me, what kind of person does that? Someone desperate. Garrett stood in the doorway. Someone who knows they're running out of time. The penthouse felt like a museum after hours. Beautiful and cold, and empty in ways that had nothing to do with furniture. Garrett had insisted she come here rather than return to her apartment. Barrett had swept it for additional evidence plants. Found none, but the violation of knowing someone had invaded her space made the thought of sleeping there impossible. She stood at the window, looking down at Chicago from 42 stories up. The city sparkled, indifferent to human suffering the way cities always are. Garrett emerged from his study holding 2 glasses of whiskey. You don't have to drink it, but it's there if you need it. She took the glass, didn't drink. This is my fault. I pushed too hard. I should have anticipated Clarence would escalate. You didn't inject poison into my father's IV. No, but I put you in Clarence's crosshairs. That amounts to the same thing. He sat on the opposite end of the couch, careful to maintain distance. I received the DNA results this afternoon, before the arrest. I was going to tell you over dinner, something civilized and planned. But circumstances have a way of destroying plans. Delaney's stomach dropped. And? Garrett pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, handed it to her. Paternity analysis results. Probability of paternity, 99.96%. The numbers swam. You're my biological father. Isabel was pregnant when she disappeared. She married Nathaniel to give you a father, to protect you from... He stopped. From what? From me, from my world, from people like Clarence who destroy anything that threatens their power. Delaney set down the glass before she dropped it. I don't know what you expect me to say. Nathaniel is my father. Biology doesn't change that. I'm not asking it to. I'm just telling you the truth because you deserve to know. Isabel loved you enough to leave me. That says everything about her priorities and nothing about my worth as a person. His voice cracked on the last words. Delaney studied him, this man who'd gone from enemy to employer to something she didn't have words for yet. Why did she leave? I don't know, but I think Clarence is involved. I think she discovered something about him, something dangerous enough that disappearing was the only option. That's speculation. Then let's get proof. He stood, pulled out his phone. Tomorrow morning we're going to Washington, D.C. We're opening that safety deposit box, and we're going to find out exactly what Clarence Whitmore has been hiding for 30 years. The flight to D.C. took 2 hours. Delaney spent them in a haze of exhaustion and shock, her mind circling the revelation like a moth around flame. Garrett was her father. The thought refused to settle into anything resembling understanding. Barrett met them at Reagan National with a rental car and news that Delaney's father had stabilized overnight. Not improving, but not getting worse. Small mercies in a universe that seemed determined to strip away everything she loved. First Continental Bank occupied a Beaux-Arts building in the financial district. All marble columns and vaulted ceilings designed to inspire confidence in institutions. The kind of confidence, Delaney thought bitterly, that had been systematically betrayed by men in expensive suits for generations. Garrett presented documentation to a manager who looked like she'd been born wearing pearls. Genealogy records proving his connection to the Steinberg family through his mother's line. Legal authorization to access historical accounts. Enough paperwork to choke a legal library. 45 minutes of verification later, they were escorted to a vault room that smelled like old money and older secrets. The safety deposit box was larger than she'd expected, 18 inches deep, metal scarred with age. The manager left them alone. Garrett opened it. Inside, the original ledger, identical to the one they'd found at Blackwood Manor, but in better condition. A contract bearing the Whitmore family seal. Receipts documenting payments spanning generations. And beneath it all, a letter. Modern paper, recent ink, dated October 15th, 1995. Garrett's hands shook as he unfolded it. To whomever opens this vault, I, Isabel Thorne, Add this document in October 1995. I recently discovered my pregnancy. The father is Garrett Sterling, a man I love but cannot be with due to circumstances beyond our control. His voice broke. Started again. His business partner, Clarence Whitmore, threatened to destroy Garrett's company if I did not disappear. He paid me $50,000 to leave Chicago and never contact Garrett again. I took the money not for myself, but to protect Garrett from ruin. I will raise this child with Nathaniel Frost, a good man who offered marriage despite knowing the truth. Delaney couldn't breathe. If you are reading this, it means the Steinberg-Whitmore secret has been discovered. Please know that Clarence Whitmore is not just complicit in 18th century theft. He is actively embezzling from Sterling Telecommunications in the 1990s. I worked as a consultant at the firm and discovered $8 million missing from accounts. When I reported this to Clarence, thinking he would help, he threatened me. Garrett made a sound like something breaking. If my daughter ever seeks the truth, tell her, I loved her father. I loved her, and I hope she finds justice. Signed, Isabel Thorne. The letter fluttered from his hands. He sank to his knees on the marble floor of a bank vault. 28 years of searching collapsing into this moment. Delaney picked up the letter, read it again, let the words rearrange everything she thought she knew about her life. Garrett's phone rang, shattering the moment. Barrett's voice came through the speaker, tight with something that might have been panic if Barrett allowed himself such indulgences. Boss, I just got word from St. Joseph's. Nathaniel Frost coded 20 minutes ago. They tried to resuscitate him for 30 minutes. Silence. He didn't make it. I'm sorry. The phone slipped from Garrett's hand. Delaney stood very still, the letter still clutched in her fingers, and felt the last piece of her old life die. Outside the vault, Washington, D.C. continued its indifferent rotation. Politicians lied, lobbyists schemed. The machinery of power ground forward over the bodies of people like Nathaniel Frost, who'd loved a woman enough to raise another man's child as his own, and died for the crime of standing between that child and the consequences of truth. Garrett looked up at her from the floor, and for the first time, Delaney saw past the wealth and power to the man underneath, the one who'd lost Isabel, who'd lost 28 years with a daughter he'd never known existed, who was watching that daughter lose the only father she'd ever claimed while he knelt uselessly in a bank vault full of evidence that couldn't save anyone who mattered. I'm sorry. The words came out raw, scraped from somewhere deeper than his throat. I should have protected you. I should have. You didn't kill him. Clarence did. The fury in her voice surprised them both. Clarence Whitmore murdered my father. He framed me. He poisoned my mother's memory with threats and bribes. And he's been stealing from you for 30 years. She held up Isabel's letter. My mother wanted justice, so let's give it to her. Garrett stood, straightened his jacket with hands that had stopped shaking. What do you need? A phone, a lawyer, and an FBI agent who specializes in white-collar crime. Done. They walked out of the vault together, carrying documents that would destroy a man who'd spent 3 decades believing himself untouchable. Behind them, the safety deposit box lay empty, its secrets finally released into daylight. Justice, Delaney thought, might not bring back the dead, but it could make sure they didn't die for nothing. And sometimes, in a world built on compromises and moral bankruptcies, that was the best you could hope for. The war had begun. The FBI field office in Chicago occupied a brutalist concrete tower that looked designed to intimidate. Special Agent Miranda Castellanos met them in a conference room stripped of personality. Beige walls, fluorescent lights, the kind of space where truth got extracted under pressure. She listened to their story for 90 minutes without interruption, took notes in precise shorthand, examined the documents they brought from the vault with the care of someone who'd seen evidence contaminated by eager hands too many times. When Garrett finished explaining, she set down her pen. You're describing RICO violations spanning 3 decades, embezzlement, conspiracy, attempted murder, the kind of case that makes careers or destroys them, depending on how it plays out. Can you help us? I can open an investigation, but I need more than historical documents and a letter from a dead woman. I need current financial evidence, account transfers, communication records, something that proves Clarence Whitmore is actively committing fraud right now, not just benefiting from crimes his ancestors committed. Garrett pulled out his phone, opened an encrypted file. I ordered a comprehensive audit of Sterling Telecommunications 3 days ago. Forensic accountants found $45 million missing from various accounts over 18 years. The money was funneled through shell companies, then laundered through real estate holdings. All of it traces back to Clarence. He slid the tablet across the table. Castellanos scrolled through pages of financial analysis, her expression never changing. This is good. This is very good. But he'll claim someone else had access to those accounts. He'll blame subordinates. We need something that puts him personally at the scene of the crime. We have his phone records. Barrett dropped a second folder on the table. 23 calls to Holden Vance at the Pinnacle Club in the 2 weeks leading up to Dr. Frost's arrest, including one made 40 minutes before the anonymous tip came in about drugs in her apartment. That's conspiracy to frame. Possibly witness tampering if we can prove the drug charges were fabricated to discredit her testimony. The drug evidence was planted. Delaney's first words since entering the room came out flat, drained of everything except fact. I can prove it. The bags had a manufacturing date stamp from a supplier that doesn't distribute in Illinois. Whoever planted them bought them out of state. Castellanos studied her with new interest. You're a linguist. How do you know about drug supply chains? I read the forensic report my defense attorney obtained. Then I spent 6 hours researching packaging standards. When you can decode 18th century banking ciphers, pharmaceutical supply chains aren't that complicated. The agent's mouth twitched towards something that might have been a smile. All right, here's how this works. You're going to give me everything you have, every document, every recording, every financial statement. My team will verify it independently. If it checks out, we'll coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office and move forward with charges. How long will that take? Weeks, maybe months. White-collar cases require... We don't have months. Garrett leaned forward. Clarence knows we found the vault. He tried to kill Dr. Frost's father. He'll run or destroy evidence or both if we give him time. Then what do you propose? A board meeting, emergency session, mandatory attendance. I'll present the evidence publicly, force his hand, and you'll have agents there to arrest him when he breaks. Castellanos shook her head. That's not protocol. We don't stage arrests for dramatic effect. You do if you want him to confess. Delaney's voice cut through the objection. Clarence Whitmore is a narcissist. 30 years of getting away with fraud have made him arrogant. Put him in a room where his power is being stripped away in front of witnesses, and he'll try to justify himself. He'll incriminate himself because he can't help it. The agent considered this. You're talking about psychological manipulation. I'm talking about giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. Isn't that half of what investigators do? Castellanos looked at Garrett. This is your company. Your board. You're willing to blow it up publicly? I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make sure the man who killed Nathaniel Frost and terrorized his daughter goes to prison for the rest of his life. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. All right, give me 3 days to coordinate with my team and the U.S. Attorney. We'll have agents present as external auditors. But if this goes sideways, if he lawyers up before we can get a confession, the whole case could collapse. It won't collapse, Delaney stood, because I'm going to translate every document in that vault into language so clear that even the best defense attorney in America can't spin it. And I'm going to do it on the record, in front of witnesses, so there's no question about authenticity. She looked at Garrett. When do we call the meeting? Friday. 10 a.m. That gives us 3 days to prepare. They worked around the clock. Delaney translated documents until her vision blurred. Garrett coordinated with lawyers who specialize in securities fraud. Barrett assembled a presentation that would make the evidence impossible to deny. Thursday night, Delaney sat in Garrett's study, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups, and felt the full weight of what they were about to do. "You should get some sleep." Garrett stood in the doorway, looking as exhausted as she felt. "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see my father's face. The way he looked in that hospital bed before." Her throat closed around the words. Garrett crossed the room, sat in the chair across from her. "Nathaniel was a remarkable man. He loved you enough to raise you as his own. That's a rare kind of courage. He died because I was too stupid to see the danger, because I thought I could play in your world without consequences. He died because Clarence Whitmore is a sociopath who values money more than human life. That's not your fault, isn't it? I could have walked away, taken the $85,000 and saved my company, and left you to figure out your own problems. But I wanted the million. I wanted to be the hero, and my father paid the price." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother wrote in that letter that she left to protect me, to protect you. She spent 15 years hiding from the truth because she thought it would keep you safe. But the truth has a way of finding us anyway, doesn't it?" "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you didn't cause this. Clarence did. And tomorrow we're going to make sure he answers for it. Not because it will bring Nathaniel back, not because it will undo the damage, but because sometimes the only thing that separates us from the people who destroy lives is our willingness to stand up and say, 'No, enough, not one more person.'" The words settled into her bones. "Why didn't you fight for her? For my mother? When she disappeared, why didn't you?" "Because I was a coward." The confession came without hesitation. "I had a wife I didn't love, and a company I was building, and ambitions that felt more important than happiness. When Isabel vanished, part of me was relieved. I didn't have to choose. I didn't have to sacrifice anything." He met her gaze directly. "I've spent 28 years trying to make up for that failure, building an empire, making money, convincing myself that success was the same as redemption. But it's not, and it never will be. So what is? This, right now, fighting for something that matters instead of something that pays. That's the only redemption worth having." Delaney looked at the man who'd given her life without knowing it, who'd lost the woman he loved because his business partner was a monster, who was risking everything he'd built to chase a justice that wouldn't resurrect the dead or rewrite the past. "I don't know how to be your daughter. I don't know how to be your father, but maybe we can figure it out together. After tomorrow, after we finish this." She nodded. They worked until dawn painted the windows gold. The Sterling Telecommunications boardroom could seat 40 people comfortably. Today it held 27, counting the 4 FBI agents disguised as external auditors and the stenographer recording every word for the federal case file. Delaney sat beside Garrett at the head of the table, conscious of every eye tracking her presence. These people knew her as the waitress who translated their salvation. They didn't know she was the daughter their CEO had spent 3 decades not knowing existed. Clarence Whitmore arrived last, projecting the confidence of someone who'd walked into 100 board meetings knowing he controlled the outcome. He took his seat at Garrett's right hand, the position he'd occupied for 30 years. "Garrett, I have to say I'm surprised by this emergency session. The Whitmore acquisition is dead. What's left to discuss? Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit murder. Take your pick." The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Clarence's smile never wavered, but something behind his eyes went very still. "I'm sorry, what? Dr. Frost, would you present your findings?" Delaney stood, activated the projection screen. The Steinberg ledger appeared, photographed in high resolution, text annotated with her translation. In 1809, Heinrich Steinberg documented a theft that would define 2 centuries of corruption. The Whitmore family didn't build their fortune through innovation or hard work. They built it by providing false testimony that allowed a business partner to steal his brother's company. In exchange, they received 30% of all profits in perpetuity. She advanced the slides. Bank records, property transfers, the contract bearing the Whitmore seal. For 7 generations, your family has been living off stolen wealth. But that was just the foundation. The real crime began in 1995 when Isabel Thorne, a linguistic consultant working for Sterling Telecommunications, discovered that you, Mr. Whitmore, were embezzling funds. Clarence stood abruptly. "This is slander. I'm calling my attorney." "Sit down." Garrett's voice could have cut steel. "You'll have plenty of time to talk to attorneys after the FBI arrests you." "The FBI?" One of the external auditors stood, produced a badge. "Special Agent Miranda Castellanos, Federal Bureau of Investigation." "Mr. Whitmore, we have evidence linking you to $45 million in embezzled funds over 18 years. We also have evidence connecting you to conspiracy charges related to witness tampering and attempted murder." Clarence's face went from confident to pale to flushed in the span of 3 seconds. "You can't prove any of this." "Actually, we can't." Delaney advanced to the next slide. Isabel's letter, photographed in the vault, enlarged so every word was legible. "Your first mistake was threatening my mother. Your second was thinking she wouldn't document it. Your third was trying to kill my father when you realized I was getting close to the truth." "Your father?" Clarence's laugh came out strangled. "Nathaniel Frost was a nobody, a washed-up professor who raised me with more integrity than you've shown in your entire life. Who loved a woman brave enough to walk away from the man she loved to protect her child from people like you." The room went silent. Garrett stood, moved to stand beside Delaney. "Clarence, I've known you for 30 years. We built this company together, or so I thought. Turns out you were robbing me blind while I trusted you with my business, with my life." He pulled out a folder, dropped it on the table in front of Clarence. "Phone records, 23 calls to Holden Vance, bank transfers to offshore accounts, travel records showing you in Virginia the same week we visited Blackwood Manor. You've been tracking us, trying to stop us, and when threats didn't work, you escalated to murder." "I didn't murder anyone." "You hired someone to inject potassium into Nathaniel Frost's IV. We have security footage from Sycamore Hills showing 2 men entering his room. The facility's records show no authorized medication changes. The toxicology report confirms lethal levels of potassium in his system. And one of your hired men is already cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence." Clarence sank back into his chair. The mask of confidence cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. "You don't understand. My family's money was tied up in the Steinberg Company for generations. We were owed that share. It was compensation for perjury, for fraud, for theft." Delaney's voice cut through his justification like a knife through rotten fabric. "Your family didn't earn anything. You stole it. And when you thought I might expose that theft, you tried to destroy me. You planted drugs in my apartment. You arranged for my father to be murdered. You did all of that to protect money you never had a right to in the first place." Clarence looked around the room, searching for allies. Found none. "Garrett, we've been friends for 3 decades. You can't let them do this." "We were never friends. I was just too blind to see it." Castellanos gestured to the other agents. "Clarence Whitmore, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent." Clarence moved faster than anyone expected for a man in his late 50s. He lunged for his briefcase, yanked it open, pulled out a pistol that looked absurdly large in the corporate setting. Agents reached for their weapons, but Clarence was already moving, grabbing Delaney by the arm and hauling her against his chest, gun pressed to her temple. "Nobody move." The room froze. Garrett's face went white. Castellanos had her service weapon drawn, trained on Clarence's center mass. "Mr. Whitmore, put the gun down. You're making this worse." "Worse? Worse?" Spittle flew from his mouth. "You've already destroyed everything. My company, my reputation, my family's legacy." "Your family's legacy is fraud." Delaney's voice came out steady, despite the metal bruising her skull. 7 generations of living off stolen wealth. That's not a legacy, that's a crime syndicate. "Shut up." Clarence's arm tightened around her throat. "You smug little bitch. You and your mother, always so righteous, so sure of your moral superiority." "You knew my mother?" "Of course I knew her. Isabel Thorne, the brilliant researcher who couldn't mind her own business. She found my accounts, found the discrepancies. Instead of coming to me quietly, letting me fix it, she went to her lover boy here." He jerked his head toward Garrett. "So I made her disappear, offered her money and a threat in the same envelope, told her if she didn't leave Chicago, I'd make sure Garrett's company collapsed and took her precious baby down with it. She took the deal because she was weak, just like you. She took the deal because she was protecting me." Delaney's mind worked through the angles. Clarence was right-handed. The gun was in his right hand, pressed to her right temple. If she moved left and down, "Your mother was a coward who chose money over love, and you're about to make the same choice." "No." Delaney's voice dropped to something cold and final. "I'm choosing something better." She drove her elbow backward into Clarence's solar plexus, while simultaneously dropping to her left, exactly as the self-defense instructor had taught her during those 4 months of classes she'd taken after a close call on the Red Line 2 years ago. The gun discharged. The bullet went high, embedding itself in the ceiling. Delaney rolled away as FBI agents swarmed forward. One tackled Clarence to the ground. Another kicked the gun across the room. Castellanos knelt beside Delaney. "You okay?" "Better than him." Clarence thrashed against the agents, pinning him down, screaming obscenities that devolved into incoherent rage. They cuffed him, hauled him to his feet. Blood streamed from his nose where he'd hit the marble table during the tackle. His shirt was torn. All the dignity and power he'd projected for 30 years had evaporated, leaving only a desperate man facing the consequences of choices compounded over decades. "You'll regret this." His eyes locked on Garrett. "All of you. I have lawyers. I have connections. I'll be out in 24 hours. You have nothing." Garrett's voice was quiet, absolute. "Your accounts are frozen. Your assets seized. Your connections won't risk their reputations defending a man caught on camera attempting to take a hostage. You're done, Clarence, and you did it to yourself." They led him away. The boardroom remained silent for a full 30 seconds after the door closed. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. Delaney stood there, ears still ringing from the gunshot, and felt the full weight of what had just happened settle onto her shoulders. Garrett moved to her side. "Are you hurt?" "No, just tired. Let's go home." Holden Vance's arrest happened without drama. FBI agents found him at the Pinnacle Club, trying to delete security footage and shred employment records. They charged him with conspiracy, evidence tampering, and accessory to attempted murder. He tried to negotiate, offered to testify against Clarence in exchange for immunity. The prosecutors laughed him out of the room. 6 weeks later, Delaney stood in a cemetery outside Chicago, watching them lower Nathaniel Frost's casket into ground that had frozen hard with the first real cold of winter. 20 people attended, colleagues from his years teaching history at Northwestern, former students whose dissertations he'd advised, Preston and the team from Cypher Solutions, Constance Webb, Garrett's housekeeper, who'd never met Nathaniel but came because she understood loss, and Garrett, standing a respectful distance away, letting Delaney grieve without crowding her with his presence. The priest spoke words about dust and resurrection, about lives well lived and love that transcends death. Delaney barely heard them. When it was over, When the last mourner had offered condolences and drifted away, Garrett approached. He would have been proud of you. He would have told me I was reckless, that I put myself in unnecessary danger. He would have been right and proud. Both things can be true. She looked at the fresh grave, the flowers already wilting in the cold. I keep thinking about what my mother wrote in that letter, about protecting the people you love, even when it costs you everything. Nathaniel did that. He raised me knowing I wasn't his, loved me anyway, never asked for recognition or gratitude. That's what parents do, or should do, anyway. Garrett pulled an envelope from his coat. I found this in your mother's things. Your father, Nathaniel, sent it to me 3 years ago. I never opened it because I didn't know who he was or why he'd be writing to me. But after we found the vault, I went back through old mail. Delaney took the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive. Nathaniel's handwriting, precise, academic, covered the front. She opened it. Dear Mr. Sterling, we've never met, but I believe we share something important. My daughter Delaney carries your genes and my name. Her mother asked me to raise her as my own, and I have done so gladly. She is brilliant, stubborn, and possessed of a moral clarity that reminds me daily why Isabel was remarkable. I'm writing because Isabel passed away last month. Before she died, she asked me to tell you something if you ever came looking. She never regretted her choice. She loved you. She loved our daughter more. And she believed that protecting Delaney from your world was worth sacrificing her own happiness. I don't know if you ever tried to find her. I don't know if you care. But Delaney deserves to know her heritage, should she choose to pursue it. The pendant she wears was yours originally. Isabel kept it as a reminder that some loves are worth the cost of keeping them distant. If you're reading this, you likely already know the rest. Just understand, Delaney is extraordinary, and whatever happens, she'll find her own path. She always does. Respectfully, Nathaniel Frost. Delaney folded the letter with hands that trembled. He knew. He always knew, and he never said anything. Because he understood that some truths need the right timing. Some gifts require patience. I wish I could thank him. You already did. You lived the life he hoped you'd live. Brilliant, stubborn, morally clear. She smiled despite the tears. He sent this 3 years ago. You could have found me then. I know. I'll regret that delay for the rest of my life. But we're here now, and we have time to figure out what comes next. The trials happened faster than anyone expected. Clarence's lawyers attempted every delay tactic known to American jurisprudence, but the evidence was overwhelming, and the judge had no patience for procedural games. The prosecution presented 47 witnesses, 300 exhibits, 1,200 pages of financial records annotated by forensic accountants. Delaney testified for 6 hours across 2 days, translated documents, explained the cipher, connected dots with the precision of someone who'd spent years training her mind to find patterns in chaos. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced Clarence Whitmore to 40 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Assets seized to the tune of $67 million, including the embezzled funds and the Whitmore family estate built on stolen wealth. Holden Vance received 8 years for his role in the conspiracy. The media called it the largest white-collar prosecution in Illinois history. Delaney called it Friday and went back to work. 6 months after the trial, Cipher Solutions occupied a new office in the Loop. Real walls instead of cubicle partitions. A conference room with actual chairs. Windows that overlook the Chicago River. The company had 28 employees now. The lawsuit against CompuLingua had been settled in their favor after their opponents' investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. Delaney stood in her office, an actual office with a door and everything, and reviewed contracts for 3 new projects. A museum needed medieval manuscripts translated. The State Department wanted analysis of diplomatic correspondence from the Ottoman Empire. and Sterling Telecommunications had just renewed their consulting contract for another 3 years. Preston knocked on the doorframe. "Boss, there's someone here to see you." Garrett stepped into view, holding 2 cups of coffee from the shop downstairs. "Thought you might need a break." Delaney gestured to the visitor's chair. He sat, handed her the coffee, light, 2 sugars, exactly how she liked it. A detail he'd learned through observation rather than asking. "How's the State Department project?" "Complicated. The documents are in Ottoman Turkish using a variant Arabic script with Persian loanwords and Armenian calendar dates. It's basically linguistic archaeology." "You love it." "I do." They drank coffee in comfortable silence. Over the past 6 months, they developed a rhythm. Sunday dinners at Garrett's penthouse, usually with Constance cooking because neither of them could manage anything more complex than scrambled eggs. Weekly phone calls that started as business updates and evolved into actual conversations. Occasional lunches where they argued about politics and discovered they disagreed on almost everything except the fundamentals. It wasn't easy. Building a relationship from scratch at 28 and 62 required patience and willingness to forgive the gaps. But they were trying. "I got a letter from the Steinberg descendants yesterday." Garrett pulled an envelope from his jacket. "They're donating part of the restitution to establish a scholarship. The Isabel Thorne Memorial Fund. Full ride to Stanford for students pursuing linguistics or cryptography. They want you on the selection committee." Delaney's throat tightened. "My mother would have loved that." "She would have loved you, the person you've become, what you did to bring Clarence down." "I didn't do it for justice. I did it for revenge." "Does the distinction matter?" She considered this. "Maybe not, but I like to think there's a difference between destroying someone because you can and destroying someone because they've forfeited the right to walk free. One is cruelty, the other is consequences." "And which was Clarence?" "Consequences. He chose his path 30 years ago when he threatened my mother. Everything after that was just the debt coming due." Garrett stood, moved to the window. "I've been thinking about what you said, about dignity not being something you buy, about bankruptcy of the soul. I was angry when I said that. You were right when you said it." He turned to face her. "I've spent 6 months restructuring the company, fired 15 executives who were profiting from Clarence's schemes, established an ethics board with real power to investigate complaints, created a whistleblower protection program. That's good. It's not enough. I'm stepping down as CEO." Delaney set down her coffee. "What?" "I'll stay on the board, maintain ownership. But I'm 62 years old, and I've spent 30 years building something I'm not sure deserves to exist in its current form. It's time for someone else to run it. Someone younger, someone who actually believes in more than quarterly profits." "You believe in more than profits?" "Now I do. Because my daughter taught me the difference between wealth and worth." The words hung between them. Daughter. He'd never said it out loud before. Always skirted around the relationship with careful phrasing and emotional distance. "I'm still figuring out how to be your daughter. I'm still figuring out how to be your father. But I think we're allowed to learn as we go." He pulled a small box from his pocket. "This was Isabel's. I gave it to her the night before she disappeared. She left it in the apartment we shared. I've carried it for 28 years, not knowing why. Now I do." Inside the box, a silver pendant identical to the one Delaney wore. Same design, same initials. "There were 2. I kept one, gave her the other. The idea was that no matter how far apart we were, we'd always be connected. Naive, in retrospect, but the sentiment was real." He handed her the box. "I want you to have both, your mother's and mine, because whatever distance existed between us for 28 years, it's gone now. We're connected, and I'm not letting you disappear the way she did." Delaney took the box, opened it, let tears fall without trying to stop them. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just let me be part of your life. That's all I ask." "You already are." 1 year after Nathaniel's funeral, Delaney drove to the cemetery alone. Spring had finally arrived in Illinois, tentative and fragile, painting everything in shades of green so bright they hurt to look at. She knelt beside the grave. The headstone was simple granite, inscribed with words she'd chosen. Nathaniel Frost, teacher, father, guardian of truth. I brought you something. She pulled out the letter Garrett had saved, the one Nathaniel had sent 3 years ago. I read this about 100 times. Still can't figure out how you knew exactly what to say. You were always better with words than I am. The wind moved through the cemetery, carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass. Clarence died in prison last month, heart attack. The guards found him in the shower. I thought I'd feel something, satisfaction maybe, or vindication. But mostly I just felt tired, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten it was there until suddenly it wasn't. She traced the letters of his name. Garrett's stepping down as CEO, says he wants to spend more time on things that matter. I think he means me, but he's too much of a stoic to say it directly. We have dinner every week, argue about everything. He's teaching me about business. I'm teaching him about humility. It's a work in progress. A robin landed on a nearby headstone, cocked its head toward her. I miss you. I know you weren't my biological father, but you were my real father in every way that counts. You chose me, chose to love me when you didn't have to. That's a gift I'm still learning to understand. She stood, brushed dirt from her knees. I'm going to be okay. Better than okay, actually. The company's thriving. I'm teaching a seminar at Northwestern in the fall. Your old department reached out, asked if I'd be interested. And I think I'm finally figuring out who I am when I'm not running from debt or fighting for survival. The robin took flight, disappearing into the blue vault of spring sky. Thank you for everything, for being the father I needed when the one who should have been there didn't know I existed, for teaching me that family is something you build, not something you're born into, for showing me that the best kind of love is the kind that asks nothing in return. She laid flowers on the grave, tulips, his favorite. Then she walked back to her car, carrying the weight of loss and the lightness of release in equal measure. 18 months after the trials, Delaney received a call from the Department of Justice. Dr. Frost, this is Deputy Director Holbrook from the Art Crimes Division. We have a situation involving Renaissance manuscripts, encrypted papal letters, possible Medici family forgery. We need linguistic analysis that, frankly, no one else in the country is qualified to provide. What's the timeline? We'd need you in Florence next month, 3 weeks on site, all expenses covered, plus consultation fees. Delaney pulled up her calendar. I'll need to coordinate with my team. Can I call you back in 24 hours? Of course. Oh, and Dr. Frost? We've been following the Whitmore case. What you did, exposing that kind of systemic corruption, that's the kind of work that matters. We'd be honored to work with you. After hanging up, Delaney sat at her desk and stared at the 2 pendants she'd had mounted in a shadow box on the wall. Isabel's and Garrett's, side by side, proof that love could survive distance and time and all the forces that tried to tear it apart. Her phone buzzed, a text from Garrett. Dinner tonight? I'm attempting lasagna. Constance is standing by with a fire extinguisher. She smiled, typed back, I'll bring wine and low expectations. Another text appeared immediately. Low expectations are how I excel as a parent. See you at 7. 3 years ago, she'd been serving drinks to people who didn't see her as human. 2 years ago, she'd been drowning in debt and desperation. 1 year ago, she'd watched her father's casket descend into frozen ground. Now she ran a company that mattered. Had a biological father, learning to be a real one. Carried the legacy of 2 people who'd loved her enough to sacrifice their own happiness for hers. The world hadn't become kinder. People hadn't become more generous. The systems that crushed the vulnerable in service of the powerful still ground forward with mechanical indifference. But she'd learned something that felt like wisdom. You can't change the entire world. You can only choose in each moment whether to be the kind of person who adds to the cruelty or fights against it. Whether to let your wounds make you harder or let them teach you empathy for other people's pain. Dignity, it turned out, really couldn't be bought. But it could be kept, could be defended, could be wielded like a weapon against people who mistook money for power and cruelty for strength. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, keeping your dignity in a world designed to strip it away was enough to start small revolutions, enough to bring down empires built on theft and lies, enough to prove that the arc of the moral universe might not bend toward justice on its own, but people could grab it with both hands and pull. Delaney packed her briefcase, locked her office, and headed home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new injustices that needed exposure, new ciphers waiting to be decoded. But tonight, she had lasagna to endure and wine to drink, and a father who was trying, imperfectly but genuinely, to make up for 28 years of absence. That felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like victory.